All right,
Okay.
welcome to the Beaker Home of Greater Washington Healthy Initiatives Program. Today, we will be talking about premarital counseling, and we will begin with Rabbi Eliyahu Reingold, who is the Rosh Kollel at the Kollel Zichron Amram of Yeshiva of Greater Washington, as well as a noted Chassan teacher in our community. Rabbi Reingold.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts. This is, I think, a very, very special forum. It's a very important forum, and it's a great opportunity to share some thoughts. So, Mrs. Siegel, who came up with this idea together with Penny Roth, who, by the way, I just want to point out, is also an ordained rabbi. Though he's not practicing as a rabbi right now. So, and a very special friend in Talmud. So they have this idea of sharing this idea of the importance of getting some type of preparation before the marriage, for marriage, which historically was done in Klal Yisrael through the vehicle, the medium of the Chassan and Kala classes. So besides learning the actual halachas, which would be relevant when a Chassan and Kala prepare themselves for marriage, it was done in I would say, we'll say it judiciously, in an unorganized form. The chassan teacher, at his own discretion, would add different thoughts about what it means to be married, shalom bayis, understanding the challenges ahead, etc. I started teaching chassanim. I'm going to say approximately, because I don't remember for sure. I would say somewhere in the area of 1987 or so, 1988. So you can do the math how many years ago that was. And I noticed that there was a lack of direct focus on that. So I decided to add in various thoughts on that area very much. And then when I moved here to Silver Spring in 1997, there were already individuals actually learning with the Chassanim. I decided to focus specifically on the Shalom Bayis element and add that as a supplement to what they were already doing with their Chassan teacher. I collaborated with Mrs. Robin Nyman Alav Sholem, who was teaching Kalas, and we spoke many times about different topics, post-marriage counseling issues, which I do as well, but pre-marriage as well, points would need to be brought up in the Chassan Kala teaching. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of some of the thoughts that I would share with Chassanim to help them prepare for marriage, and to give an example of what it sounds like we're trying to prepare a young man for marriage. And then I guess we don't have a Kala teacher on here who would give us the Kala version of that, but I've assumed that the Kala teachers were doing something similar. The Torah says, so the first introduction of the concept of marriage, we have Adam and Chava getting married. And the Torah introduces the idea that Hashem is going to make a wife for Adam with the words, it's not good for a man to be by himself. So I used the following analogy. So there once was a fellow named Goldberg, and Goldberg liked making money. And he realized that there were many areas he was very good at. But he could use a partner. It would have been very helpful to have a partner to help him make money. So he found a partner who happened to also have the last name Goldberg. And the two of them got together and they started making money together. So they were Goldberg and Goldberg, a limited liability corporation. One day, Goldberg realized he can make more money without Goldberg. So end of the partnership. Because what is Goldberg need Goldberg for when he can make more money without? So if a person realizes that his goal in life is just to become happy, one day he wakes up and says, I'd be very happy if I have somebody else that's lonely without a wife. I'm going to be very happy if I have a wife. So they get married, and his goal is to be happy, her goal is to be happy, and we have Goldberg and Goldberg, Limited Liability Corporation. Well, one day Goldberg says, I would be happier without Goldberg. And then we have a problem. We don't have Goldberg and Goldberg anymore. So if the Torah does not describe the purpose of marriage is to get rid of your loneliness and to make you happy, the Torah describes that there's a growth process which takes place through marriage. You become tov, become a better person, and you grow through the process of marriage. So the first step is we understand the goal of marriage, or a primary goal of marriage, is not just to bring you happiness and take away the loneliness in a person's life, but it's actually going to force you to grow and become a better person. My wife and I did a session on Shalom Bayis. I think it was in 1993. And we started the session with the following question. We gave out to everybody, we gave them all a card. and a pencil. And they said, marriage is fill in the blank. Happiness is, dot, dot, dot. Marriage is dot, dot, dot. And everybody got a chance to fill in the blank what they thought marriage is going to be, what marriage is. And then we gave our answer. And we said, marriage is an opportunity for growth. That was our answer. The myth of Leo explains that one of the ways the human being comes to his perfection is his child is born as a taker. He needs very much his parents, and he takes from the parents tremendously. And the goal of life is to change from being a taker to being a giver, which then gives you an opportunity to become like Hashem, like a Kadosh Baruch Hu, like God. You become a giver as opposed to a taker. God is a giver. One of the greatest ways to give is through marriage. You live with somebody 24/7, 365. You're always aware of the opportunities to give to them, whether it's time, whether it's interest, etc. But I think the greatest opportunity which you have to give to somebody is respecting somebody else's thought process. We tend to grow up and we respect our own thought process very much. We understand what's right and what's wrong. And we marry somebody who sees the world quite differently than us. And we learn to respect. There's another way of looking at the world. A second way of looking at the world, which is as valid or maybe even more valid than ourselves. And when we do that, we learn to get into somebody else's mindset and thought process. We learn to respect that. We do that with our spouse. We can do that with our children. We can learn to understand where our child is coming from. And then just instead of talking at our children, we're actually listening to our children. We're actually hearing what they're saying because we're respecting what they have to say, where they're coming from. We can do it with our neighbor. And we could do it with the members of the community, and we could do it with any member, any person that we meet. But the training grounds where you're forced to do that is in a successful marriage, is in the marriage. Because there are many times where people see things quite differently, and they walk in with this thought process of, well, I'm right, and I just have to convince you why I'm right. And then you realize that that's not true. The other person has a totally valid way of looking at something. So there's a famous concept of opposites attract. And that is very true in marriage, as long as they're not too opposite. If they're very opposite, they actually repel each other. But if they're not too far away from each other, so one will bring this strength to the table, one brings that strength to the table. So when you're dating, that sounds like a lot of fun. When you're living with it, it's very challenging. The idea that you're vivacious and you're exuberant and you're spontaneous is great, but I like things being organized and predictable. So on the date, that's really fun. This person is such a, what are our plans? What's his job is? I like to know that by Tuesday. Another person decides that what's his job is at 10 o'clock. It gets on my nerves. So how do I deal with that? Well, I'm right and she's wrong, or vice versa. I'm right and he's wrong because it's important to be organized. Well, yeah, but what do you do when you have one of your kids who's very spontaneous and you're always to tell them that they're wrong? Or you learn to appreciate the violence of being spontaneous. So you learn to appreciate that. I learned to appreciate what your spouse brings to the table. I had a story that I met a young man and I asked him how long he's married. So he said he's in his 5th year of Shana Rishona. Shana Rishona is the description of the first year of marriage, which the Torah talks about has special halachic significance. So he said he's in his 5th year of that. So the idea of Shana Rishona is a very nice time. It's a very exciting time, etc. So my response, which I didn't mean to burst his bubble, but I said nebuch, which means I'm sorry to hear that. So he gave me this quizzical look. I said, well, by me, my 2nd year of marriage was better than my 1st. My 3rd year of marriage was better than my 2nd. And each year that you work on your marriage, you develop, you grow, you understand each other better, you respect each other more. Your marriage is better. I don't want 5 years of Shana Rishona. Shana Rishona is a beautiful time. It's an exciting time. It's the first moments of getting to know each other. It's also very challenging. It's a time where you are working out these rough edges and the details and the challenges. So I shared with him an idea which I heard from Rabbi Yisrael Tauber. I heard it in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Tauber. That he asked an individual which actually had a shalom bayis issues, needed some help with his marriage. He asked him, had he ever seen the process of polishing diamonds? And he said, no, I've never seen it. He says, well, when you see a raw diamond, the raw diamond does not look scintillating in any which way. It's very dull. A person who's an expert takes the diamond and puts it in the vise, and a diamond is very hard, so you have to put a tremendous pressure on it and you rip it apart. And a person knows what he's doing, rips it apart at the right place. The next step is to start polishing it. Well, how do you polish a diamond? Diamond is the hardest subject known to man. The only thing you can polish a diamond, anything which you rub against a diamond, the diamond remains the same. The other item gets polished. The only thing you can polish a diamond with is a diamond. So since these two diamonds are now the opposites of each other, you start rubbing them against each other, and eventually the result is two polished diamonds. So Hashem took man, Adam and Chava, according to the Medrash, they were created as one. He rips them apart. He rubs them against each other, and the result is two polished diamonds. So the goal of marriage is not that everything should be perfect and easy and wonderful. The goal of marriage is that there should be challenges. And we expect challenges, and we grow from challenges. So this idea that, well, this guy's marriage, that woman's marriage is so perfect and so wonderful. So whenever a couple says that to me, usually that takes place after marriage. And they ask me, why do we have problems in our marriage and nobody else has those problems? So I ask them, when you're walking down the street and somebody asks you, how's it going in your marriage? You say, oh, wonderful. You don't say, well, it's really bad. You don't start sharing all of your problems. You put on this nice facade. So why do you assume that everybody else is not wearing, is real and not wearing a facade? And you're the only person wearing the facade. Everybody has challenges in marriage. That's the most normal thing in the world. You put two people together in the same room 24/7, you're going to have challenges. I give them the following mashal. Dale Carnegie has a story. Maybe I'll end with this story because we're going a little bit long over here, about a group of scientists which went to Antarctica. So to get to Antarctica, they would go by boat. Now there's an airstrip there, but then there wasn't any airstrip. The port was only ice-free 2 to 3 months a year. So once the boat is docked and it's in, you're there for the next 10 months together. Now you can't live above ground because it's too cold to live above ground. So they have these caverns underground where they live, and they go out for expeditions occasionally, but basically they stay in the same caverns for these 10 months. It's like COVID or something, like stay in your cave for months and months on end. So now they're scientists, and each person is there to study different aspects of why they're there. And each person, of course, has their idiosyncrasies because we all do. So one person was there to study the nutrition. He's some form of nutritionist. The impact of extreme weather on the body's ability to absorb minerals, elements, proteins, carbohydrates, etc. That was his goal while he was there. He also was very into the importance of nutrition himself because he was a nutritionist, and he decided, he'd done studies, it's important when you eat something before you swallow it to chew each morsel 42 times. That was the number which he felt was the optimal number to know how to start the process of digestion even before you swallow, and that was what he would do. Across the table from him, my breakfast the first day was somebody who was not a nutritionist, was not into chewing every morsel 42 times, and he found this chewing of the morsel 42 times a little bit uncomfortable because the guy was chewing and chewing and chewing, and then again and again and again and again. Of course, he didn't want to say anything because that's beneath his dignity to admit that it's such a little thing like that. It bothers him. It came to lunchtime and it happened again, and it bothered him a little bit more. But again, he didn't want to say anything. So the person who's writing the stories from the perspective of the non-nutritionist who's across the table from the nutritionist, he writes this story. This is a true story, and he says at the end of the 10 months that we spent eating 3 meals together, 3 meals a day together, across on the table and watching him chew these morsels again and again and again. I was so upset that I had to use every ounce of self-control not to commit murder. You take a wound on your hand, it's a little, person takes a fingernail and scratches their hand slightly. It doesn't hurt, it maybe tickles a little bit. Do it again in the same spot. And again, and again, and again, hundreds and hundreds of times. It's an open wound. A festering wound. That's the challenge of marriage. We have all the idiosyncrasies, all the things. This person squeezes the toothpaste tube, and this person rolls the toothpaste tube. And the roller likes the fact that it's nice and neat, and the squeezer thinks it's an absolute, who thinks it's a waste of time. The roller thinks it's an absolute mess. Who cares? It's not important. But it's those little things which add up again and again and again. And if you don't learn to respect other person's perspective and say that's a very valid way of doing it on the little things, then on the bigger things, on the biggest things, if you don't learn to do that, you're going to have a lot of challenges in your marriage. A lot of things are going to irritate you. And we don't want to admit that those things bother us because it's beneath our dignity, but they do. And eventually they come out in much more significant ways than we would like. So the process of Shalom Bayis is to learn to respect, to communicate, understand where the other person is coming from. And those things together can really make you grow as a person. You gain a new perspective. You gain respect for a new perspective. So you become a person who's not limited to your own view and your own self, which is very, at the end of the day, it's a very self-focused view. And self-focus, it's a strong gaiva, as it were, an arrogance that your right approach is the right approach. You learn humility, you learn respect for others, and these are tools which you can use in every which way in every part of your life. So that's some of the thoughts that I share with the Chassanim. And then, of course, we have conversations sometimes after the marriage when they start realizing what these, and I give them practical examples of these differences between men and women in a general sense. And then we have practical issues post-marriage, which we continue with as well. So that's what we've been doing for years, and now it moves on to the world of the therapist.
Wow, thank you so much, Rabbi
Thank you.
Reingold. That was really wonderful. I really love what you said, how you and your wife came up with the description of marriage as an opportunity for growth. And the stories and the examples that you gave really, I thought, really highlighted this and the Torah perspective on that. So really, really appreciate your thoughts. And I think in a similar theme, we're going to take it now into the world of therapy. And as Rabbi Reingold noted, therapist Penny Roth is also Rabbi Penny Roth. So he's a wonderful person to combine these perspectives. He practices emotionally focused therapy, generally with married couples. And perhaps that's a type of therapy that we are more familiar with, marital counseling, problems that arise after marriage. But today, the focus is going to be on how to expand on what Rabbi Reingold was talking about, and in the therapist space, meet with couples prior to marriage, which is a trend that's catching on a little bit more and more amongst Jewish communities, Orthodox Jewish communities. And I believe that it is Rabbi Roth's hope that more people will consider it. And of course, this is a session where both the prospective Chatan and Kala, or the Chatan and Kala, if you will, the engaged couple will meet together with the therapist. So, Penny, Rabbi Roth?
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I appreciate Rabbi Reingold's words, because Rabbi Reingold happens to be particularly very insightful in terms of, I think if I would go to a therapist, I would maybe even choose Rabbi Reingold before anyone, but I don't want to say that because I don't want to line out his work, because Rabbi Reingold always says that I get paid for the same thing that he does. So
I do it for free.
He does it for free, yeah. But the insights are just on point always. And that said, actually, even just to start, but I'll get it, like Audrey had mentioned, I appreciate this opportunity. I want to mention a disclaimer that this is not a promotion. It's not a self-promotion at all. That the therapy that I do, I mostly focused therapy in specific. The reason I do it and the reason I fell in love with it is because it is empirically based, and it is well researched, and I think it's the gold standard for couples, not just premarital, but repairing couples. But there are a lot of emotionally focused therapists out there, but there's also a lot of other forms of counseling and premarital programs that are very effective, incredibly effective. This is hopefully my short few words that I'm going to say now will bring more questions to the people that are listening, and more interest and thirst to find out more and to learn more about it. Then, that's what I'm hoping to leave a lot of open-ended to this conversation, because I want this to be something that becomes part of Klal Yisrael as a whole. As a matter of fact, I mentioned to Audrey, maybe to Rabbi Reingold also, that I am teaming up with two other therapists, also emotionally focused therapists, one in Florida, one in New Jersey, and we're working right now actually on a nonprofit organization that's going to try to mainstream premarital counseling into the Jewish world, the frum world, try to train Chassan and Kala teachers in this particular method, so we could get more people out there helping young couples be ready for marriage. So that's in the works right now. Still on the WhatsApp group stage, we're all talking to each other, and but hopefully that'll get out there sooner than later. So I want to actually, you just heard Rabbi Reingold, but it's interesting. I'm going to actually quote Rabbi Reingold, and he'll be surprised that I remember, because this is a few decades ago and many hair follicles ago, that I still remember these words from my yeshiva days. And it didn't have to do with relationships. But Rabbi Reingold, when he would speak to the yeshiva bachram, before he was a Rosh Kol, he was involved with the yeshiva. And he had said that when yeshiva is good, so the food, when boys are learning well, I should say, when the yeshiva boys are learning well, then the food tastes good, the beds are comfortable. I have friends, my chavrusas are fine. I get along with people. When I'm not learning well, we were not learning well, the food tastes bad, the beds are uncomfortable. I'm in arguments with a lot of people, very little resilience. I want to take that concept and now take it a step further, because after those yeshiva days, I realized where that same concept exists. Our most significant relationships. And I call it significant. I use the line with my couples that there's nothing inconsequential, nothing superficial when it comes to Rangel was speaking about the toothpaste, how you roll it up, how you put in the toilet paper, which way is, like, all those things that become significant in a significant relationship. And when our relationships are good and they're in a good, healthy place, especially the most important one, which is our spouse, in marriage, then the food tastes good, the beds are comfortable, I have resilience, work is okay, even, you have your problems, but you have resilience to deal with it. When our relationships are not good, then the food does not taste good, the beds are not comfortable, and even if work even if I'm successful at work, I'm not feeling too resilient and too great about myself necessarily. And I think a good example, you can just look at the people who have a lot in life, and the world, Western culture especially, is very Hollywood focused, but you see that when their relationships are bad, like, they don't seem too happy, but they have everything. And you have these billionaires who marriages are unraveling, but they're in outer space. Maybe that's why they're looking to go outer space, to get away from their spouses. But I think the examples are very clear in society that when relationships are not in a good place, then we're not in a good place. We have less resilience. Now, I like to use an example with my couples, of a high wire tightrope, and our relationship, if it is like a safety net. Now, our goal in life is not to fall into safety nets. Just like any tightrope walker, his goal is not to fall into the safety net. But the knowledge of the safety net being there behind them, and a healthy relationship being behind them, they could take on any challenge in life. They can move forward with the confidence that they have someone behind them, and an emotional connection behind them that's healthy. Then you could take on anything in life. And that's the ability to walk through the tightrope of life, so to speak, is much easier when you have that healthy relationship. So the question, though, when it comes to premarital counseling, is why rock the boat, right? But if things are good, if things are stable, so to speak, and there's no problem, so why would we even try to sit down together with a therapist, or even with custom college teacher, to bring up maybe potential issues that aren't issues? That's a great question. On top of that, it's like, who needs it? You already have to find a photographer, a caterer, a band. It's like, do I need to find a therapist? So those are important questions. I think there's two main answers to those questions. The first answer is that when I work with couples in repair, after the fact that they had created distance over time, 10 years into marriage, 15 years into marriage, I had a couple married for 50 years. And this is a testament to the couple who, after 50 years of marriage, still sought out marriage counseling. It says a lot about them. But obviously the distance between them was much greater because of the time spent not working on the relationship. But each one of these couples, over 90%, I should say, of my couples who I work with after they're married and they have struggles, started off saying, and I asked them this question specifically, how was your relationship in the beginning? And each one says, it was good, it was stable, it was great. And I asked them, what drew you to each other? And they say it was wonderful things. You actually even see smiles on their face, as if they're like, he's in their 20s again, remembering the times that they remembered. Oh, I was attracted to this, this, and this, and oh, and he was so charming, and all those things, and everything sounded great. So a lot of relationships actually do start with that starry-eyed feeling where everything's going to be wonderful. It's over time that, like Rabbi Rangel pointed out, that when we're not prepared, we're not going in understanding how things can wear off, or after Shana Rishona, how to work on building off of Shana Rishona, that distance could be created. Less emotional intimacy, communication breaks down. So that's number one. Even coming in, we could come in starry-eyed, and that's great. That's part of the nature of relationships. But to think that starry-eyed syndrome will be in your marriage forever is not necessarily realistic. So that's number one. The second reason that I would say is why rock the boat, even though it's not, like I'll point out, it's not really rocking the boat, but the concern of rocking the boat in a relationship when it's stable is that when we talk about relationships in the world of emotion, this is the world of emotion. And the focus is not quantitative, it's qualitative. We're talking about an enhancement in a relationship and improvement in a relationship. We're talking about quality. Rabbi Rangel could correct me if I'm wrong, but the expression of connection in Torah, the first time at least I think it's brought up, is with Yaakov and Yosef, nafsho kshura b'nafsho, right? We're talking about the kesher of a nefesh and a nefesh. So, and a nefesh is the neshama of a person is part of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, chelak alakami mal. It's from Hashem. There's an infinite aspect to that a relationship could go deeper and deeper and deeper. The connection between two people could get more and more tight and closer. So the quality of relationship is also such an important thing we kind of maybe overlook. We think, oh, my marriage will be fine. Be like Goldberg and Goldberg. That's the first level, right? But then, the relationship could become one unit, literally. Like, it's not Goldberg and Goldberg anymore. It's like a fusion, right? One Goldberg, right? Of two people that become literally one person. So it's a qualitative thing, and I'll tell you from experience. I didn't realize this really until I actually did training for my emotionally focused therapy. I went out to Connecticut. I have a good friend and colleague, and who is my advisor also, Mayor Salman, who used to be part of the community here in Silver Spring, and he shipped me off to a world-class trainer in Connecticut. And I remember coming back after it was 4 days, and I remember coming back and telling everyone, like my wife had called the rabbi that I worked with on the West Coast when I spent a few years on the West Coast as a rabbi, saying that you have to do this. Like, I want to go to marriage counseling. I have a good marriage. I would say, I think my wife would agree. And when I learned the methodology that I speak of, I realized there's so much more to the quality of a relationship that can be had. That why would I want to stop? Why would I want to be complacent where I am? And I called my advisor. I called this Mayor Solomon, and I said, I really want to do one of these classes. Like, I want to go to a marriage thing with my wife. He's like, I felt the same way, exactly the same way after I came back from the counseling, from the same training. So there is this aspect of qualitative experience that you can't really describe when you have a sense of a deeper connection. I think Rabbi Rangel was referring to that after when he was pointing out the second year marriage, third year marriage, fourth year marriage. If you're doing it and you're heading and you're trending, I like the word trending, in the right direction, you'll have dips. But if you're trending in the right direction, then the quality just gets deeper and deeper, and the connection gets better and better. And so that said, if I could, do I have a couple minutes, Audrey? Just to point out, a little bit.
Definitely do. You're doing great,
okay.
and
Okay.
love you.
Okay, thank you. No, because what I'd want to point out is a little bit of maybe just give you insight of something that maybe that I do with the couples. I do this more deeply and more intricately when there's a couple that comes to me in search of repair, so to speak. I'm going to use that word. repair. But the concept of or the stages of emotionally focused therapy specifically are as follows. So the premise of it, I should say, is the following. And basically, when we come into any relationship, we come in, we bring, it's based on attachment history, which basically means that whatever I bring to my current relationship is built on a lot of my experiences before I even got here today in this relationship. Same thing with my spouse, right? Before they're married. A chassan and kala, they come with a lot more in their history than meets the eye. There's a lot more in there, how they deal with emotion, how they dealt with emotion growing up. Even their parents played a major role in how they deal with emotion. Were they validated growing up? Were they not validated growing up? Were all these things, do they withdraw naturally? Do they turn to their room and close the door and just, read a book? Or were they pursuers? Are they pursuers naturally? Do they question? Are they more anxious and need to know the answer, have clarity? All these emotional responses, what we see on the surface at least, are driven by much more deeper emotions, vulnerabilities, and experience that are built on experiences of our childhood, whether with our families of origin or with experiences in school, if social experiences in school and beyond. So all of that plays such an important role in our relationships, and how we deal with our emotions is going to come out in our current relationship. So meaning a lot of issues in a lot of marriages are actually not necessarily because the other person's the enemy or each other, and that's a lot what happens. People think, oh, that person doesn't love me, or that person. But when you get to the gist of it, when you get underneath the surface to the vulnerability, you start realizing, oh, that's not the enemy. There's a certain dynamic that's created. There's a space between us that's been created over time because of a lot of things that actually even preceded this relationship that I didn't understand about myself, and I certainly didn't understand about my spouse or my partner. So what happens is that in a lot of marriages, when they start off, if they're not prepared for this, if they're not aware that the difference between, or I say the content that's on the surface, the toothpaste, all these things, you didn't pick up the milk and all these things that come up on the surface versus what's going on, the emotional process that's going on underneath, when they're not aware of this going into marriage, what ends up happening is over time, we start hardwiring a certain form of communication, a dynamic, and it starts developing. And every one of my couples, 110% have, when I speak to a couple before they start to work with me, I say, is this what you're seeing? Are you seeing that patterns coming up over and over, and almost like you slip into them 0 to 60, you can't break out of them? It's almost like, how do we get here again? And 110% say, yes, that's exactly what's going on. And the reason is because we start hardwiring ourselves into a certain dynamic, which becomes harder to shift over time. Not impossible, because I've helped a lot of couples post-marriage, and a lot of therapists out there are doing incredible work helping couples regain their dynamic. So, but going into marriage, premarital counseling, even in just 3 sessions, I really like for 70 minutes and 90 minutes each session, you could go in and trend your marriage, so to speak, in a direction where you create connection in your dynamic as opposed to distance. When you're aware of what's going on underneath the surface, you create a different trend, and which basically leads to a different dynamic. And so in the 3 steps of what I do, I'll just give you an example. Then I'm going to lead into this great couple that we have. That the first step is to distinguish between superficial content of the arguments that couples generally have, and the deeper emotional process that's underlying them. Even things like how we deal with finances, there is an emotional aspect to that. There's a lot of emotion that's connected to money, how I grew up with money, things like that. In-laws, all these things. These are contents that are on the surface that have to be understood also in a deeper way. How we deal with that. The second step is to delve into this role of attachment, which I mentioned, like during childhood, how each individual comes into relationship with a lot more than meets the eye from their childhood, from their experiences growing up, traumas, positive and negative experiences. And the third step is to learn how to de-escalate when things get difficult, and instead create connection through challenges. And like I think Rabbi Reingold was pointing out, and I like to point this out also, is that until Elon Musk creates the robot relationship, which, you know, that's not going to be meaningful, right? Like what I tell couples when they're fighting I'm talking about couples who are fighting, I say, this is awesome, great. And they always look at me like, this is awesome, this is awful. I'm like, no. I see that there's passion, there's a desire to connect here. There's opportunity here. When you're indifferent to one another, that's when I'm scared. That's when I need a defibrillator. I don't know if I have that. You know, so when I see passion, when I see fighting, I see that there's something there. That's when I can start delving into what's going on underneath the surface, and we can learn how to de-escalate and use this argument, these conflict, as a point of connection as opposed to a point of distance. So I hope that that's pretty clear, and I hope that brings up questions for everyone that's listening. I want to introduce, if I can, Yisrael and Esther Katz, who I had the opportunity to work with, and we worked, if I remember correctly, like 3 sessions. We did like the 70-minute sessions, I think, and they didn't come to me with these, you know, incredibly challenging. It probably would have been more than 3 sessions necessary if I were to work with them with real complicated issues. That's real counseling. Premarital counseling, they came to me with just wanting to really understand each other better and work through anything that they may have felt was bumpy along the way and what could potentially be bumpy along the way. With that said, they really were sincere in their work, and if you come into premarital counseling with sincerity, you're bound to be successful. So with that, I'll introduce them, Israel and Esther Katz. If you want to describe a little bit, maybe what you gained from premarital counseling in your relationship today.
Okay, sure. So a little bit of context for us is we got married during the pandemic about a year and a half ago. And before getting married, we together chose to go to premarital counseling. And I think with that, we have seen the effect on our relationship and the understanding of each other that has grown and how the counseling has benefited our communication.
So before going to premarriage counseling, honestly, we didn't really know much about premarriage counseling at all. We didn't have programs like these that really explained what counseling was in terms of this. And we knew that other people would question if our relationship was okay while we were dating, and why we would be going to counseling to begin with if everything really did seem to be okay. We didn't have any major disagreements. We didn't have any struggles or really issues when we were dating, and we had common interests and common goals, and we were happy together. So we liked to be prepared and wanted to understand what marriage would be like and what type of struggles we would get into very possibly later on. And because of that, we thought that it would be a good idea to explore through pre-marriage counseling how we can learn to work through those and understand each other better.
And for choosing the pre-marriage counseling, we both felt that we were open-minded, and we didn't feel the stigma that we know that some others do feel towards asking for help and getting what can seem like something that would be scary and weird and why rock the boat. So we just wanted to build and continue to build our relationship of support for each other through both the easy times and the difficult times. And we wanted then we found the importance of it, and we wanted to encourage each other to understand our own limits with each other and to be able to ask for help. And so with that, that's why we wanted to go forward towards the pre-marriage counseling, which from what we heard seemed to be really the best way to get into that. Yeah, we've heard of some people that have stigma, but we felt that objectively, it seemed to be the best way to go towards approaching the big life transitions. And we wanted to walk into marriage with those resources to be able to work together. And we felt that the pre-marriage counseling really helped us with that transition from life as singles to a married couple much more smoothly had we walked into it without those resources.
So a specific example of something that we gained when we learned with Penny about the struggles that we might go through later on. We know that one aspect of something that we struggled with initially was the need for time and space. We both felt very differently about that.
Yeah. For example, Esther would like to spend sometimes free time with others, while personally I might want quiet time alone to read a book when I'm stressed. And so living for our Shana Rishona was in a 1-bedroom apartment in Silver Spring. And after getting married, and was during the pandemic, us found sometimes difficult to work through that. We were both in college at the time, taking classes virtually. So again, and the counseling preemptively helped us to communicate my need for time and space, and also Esther's time that she needed when we both needed it.
So being in like that one room, we were both taking classes from the same room. We couldn't get away from each other if we wanted to. We couldn't really interact with each other necessarily. Our schedules didn't always match up. If I had a long day of classes or a very difficult test or something, I might have very much felt a need in order to be able to spend time with another person. And during a pandemic, that can be very difficult, but it was really nice to be married and to have someone right there. But if Michelle was stressed out and he needed his own time, it could have been really difficult for him to be able to give me that time that I needed to. The pre-marriage counseling taught us not just to communicate, oh, I need whatever I needed, but to recognize what the other person could give and be able to accept and appreciate the differences in how we understood ourselves and what we needed, and be able to accept when another person said no at this time, but be able to make a compromise for the future and be able to give in at a different point so that we could both feel cared about and supported in the relationship and understood.
So with the stigma that we've mentioned earlier, we understand the concern of that, both for and after having gone to pre-marriage counseling about how it's weird. And we've been questioned about that after getting married, about why we went and if it actually helped us. And there are people who are asking us who were skeptical about of the counseling. And we could say afterwards that we strongly feel it did benefit our relationship, our understanding of each other. And I know Esther said that she's even convinced some friends to go through with counseling and things like that. And we've heard positive feedback from them after they've signed up, and that they've benefited from getting a better understanding, appreciation for levels of communication that they have with their spouses from after getting married. And everyone we talked to has braved it, I think, and learned from it how we can all agree that the time is very valuable, and it's for only 3 hours or a little more, it's targeted and it's useful, and it's something that is very much worth the time, effort, and money. Those lessons are really well worth it.
Yeah, do you want to say something else? I wanted to. So could you remind me?
That we have to laid out, but if there's anything else, yeah, Vinny, you can.
I just wanted to point out because you were a little luckier than I was, because I personally didn't do premarital counseling. I didn't. The time was even it was less common than I guess now even, and you're pointing out the time, the need for space, and how each of you kind of get energy. How you re-energize is very different, and that's why you needed that space. And it took me 10 years in my own marriage to understand that I get energy when I'm connecting with people. I'm more extroverted, I guess you'd say, right? And my wife is more introverted. I didn't realize for 10 years when she would kind of like goes off, go into her room and, pick something up, read or listen to something. I thought it was something wrong with me, or something wrong with do not want to connect with the family. Like, what's going on? It took me a long time to really understand that that's how she draws her energy. And that's the concept of, I think, the key word that I didn't use when I spoke is emotional intimacy. It's kind of part of it. That's part of it. Emotional intimacy is really getting to a point where you understand yourself, first of all, but each other in a way that you could expand yourself to include the other. And even if you don't see things the same way, you don't take in the world the same way. Everything is subjective. When people, two witnesses could see the same thing, but they're going to experience it differently because of how they take in the world, how they absorb the world. I tell people I'm a subjective detective because I'm looking for subjectivity in each person, so we could try to expand ourselves to understand one another. And you were able to do that, which makes each of you feel understood in those moments when, you know, it's hard for one of you to give the other the space, but you're doing it anyway because you understand that that's important to your spouse. There's nothing that makes you feel more emotionally connected than a moment like that. It builds more trust, and trust is built over time. Yeah, so I appreciate the way you presented that.
Thank you.
Thank you for
If I can
helping
just
us
jump,
get to that point.
if I can just jump in for a second, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. That was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I just, on the end of people who haven't gotten that, what I tell them, what Finney was talking about, or rather talking about, I can encourage people to use their words. If the other person is not intuiting what you need, which is what we hope our spouses do, if they're not intuiting it, there's nothing wrong with saying it. That, you know, I'm not figuring out that you need that your need for space is something which is integral to your personality. It's not a rejection. So do you need space? I would ask those questions. I would encourage people to ask those type of questions. What do you need right now? How do you react to this? How do you feel? What gives you the energy you need to deal with this? So they can always, if you don't have that type of counseling, or even you do this, there's still going to be gaps. Using words and verbalizing is a very powerful thing, even though we always want our spouses to intuit it instead. But sadly, that doesn't always work, but words always can make up for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Reingold, for that. Thank you, Israel and Esther. That was a really very impressive presentation, and I think really conveyed not only the value of premarital counseling for you, but also the tremendous maturity that you demonstrate now as individuals, and I have no doubt in a relationship. It was really beautiful and inspiring to see even the way that you were able to kind of divide up what you wanted to say. And that in itself really showed, I think, a great level of maturity and compatibility. So thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it. Penny, Rabbi Roth, you really, I thought, described what premarital counseling could be in a wonderful, beautiful way. And of course, if anybody has any questions for any of our panelists right now, you can certainly put them into the chat. We will see them and try to address them. While we're waiting for that, I'll mention something that came up in our conversation that I had with Penny in the planning stages for this, which is also the cost. Rabbi Reingold mentioned that he's free, and that is, that's hard to beat, that cost price. And obviously, I think everybody should, and most likely does, take Kala and Chassan classes, which are most often free. And
I just want to point out, just interrupting, nowadays, I think most classes actually are there is a charge for them. There is a fee for the Chassan Kala classes nowadays. I happen to be a throwback to a different generation.
all right then.
I don't think it's such a bad thing either.
No,
I think that free.
No,
Sometimes when you pay, you're invested, and I think it is a level of dedication and commitment to the process when you're putting your money in it.
yeah.
So I see that. I see that with my clients. Pre and post. When I work with insurance and when I work outside insurance, there's a big difference between the quality of the clients, the commitment of the clients. When insurance was paying for it, it wasn't necessarily, but when they paid for their own pocket, it was a whole different experience. The results were better, interestingly.
That is interesting, and it does make a lot of sense in terms, I noticed you used the language earlier, Penny, of people putting in the work. So what gets you to put in the work? Sometimes there's, when you're
if I'm
paying
working harder than,
yeah.
I tell them, if I'm working harder than you, then we're not going to get anywhere. I'm going to facilitate, but you're going to have to work hard on it. So
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and possibly doesn't go with what I'm about to say then, but I think it could. I mean, there are obviously situations, depending on where the couple is in their stage of life, where they may really not have any funds to pay for anything. And in cases like that, I think it's possible that part of what we were talking about in this program is it's a lovely gift also, it's a meaningful gift for people to sometimes give a couple, a parents, in-laws, sometimes together. It could be a huge statement when people do that together of support and feeling. And there can be added benefits to that as well, because when a couple get some of the language that Israel and Esther were describing, that Rabbi Reingold mentioned before about using your words, and Penny, they can share that information if they choose to, and sometimes they do. I had personal experience with this, where a couple I'm connected to enjoyed premarital counseling and enjoyed sharing it with the family. So it was something that we all benefited from, as they talked about various types of communication styles and ways of saying things to best reflect what it is that you are asking of your partner. As Rabbi Reingold mentioned earlier, the tools that you get from classes, a good class, good premarital counseling with a therapist, these are tools that you can expand and use in all kinds of relationships. And therefore, the cost benefit analysis, really you have to take that into consideration, I think. But it is also an option to give it as a gift if a couple can't really afford the cost of premarital counseling, even if it's a fairly modest cost. That certainly is worth considering, I think. Okay, so do you have any questions? Just want to quickly look and see if we have
So there's one question there,
yeah.
which somebody sent in. I'll put it to Rabbi Roth first. The question is, do they recommend this specifically after engagement, even before the engagement process? What are your thoughts on that?
So before a couple is engaged, it's a different process. I mean, I'm not sure if the question is, are they coming to the therapist to do discernment, to discern whether or not this couple should be engaged, or should go ahead with the relationship? That's something that most therapists probably won't tell a couple, yes or no. That's something that I would say definitely that's something to go with someone who knows that couple much longer. When I get involved with shidduchim, and I'll answer both questions, but when I get involved with shidduchim, I never set up anyone, and just from experience also, unless the chassan has a rebbe, or the kala has someone she could talk to. Sorry, chassan for the chassan and kala. The guy has a rebbe or someone who he turns to for advice, mentorship in terms of relationship, or they come together. The couple would come, and find someone. But certainly if I'm setting up a guy, one of the questions I asked, do you have someone that you turn to talk to about relationship? Because ongoing, I wouldn't feel comfortable even setting them up with. I wouldn't feel comfortable setting up with a daughter, or my sister, right? Because I not to ensure that they're prepared and ready for something like that. So in terms of figuring out yes and yes not before a couple is engaged, that's not something necessarily that I would that a therapist would do. But if you're asking in terms of building relationship, it doesn't make necessarily a difference if the couple is really serious and they just didn't officially get engaged. But the couple is at a serious stage, then I think that certainly it would help, and maybe clarity will come from that also as a result of that. Whether or not this is something that there's compatibility, can sometimes come from sessions premarital. But that, again, like I said, that's not something that the therapist or counselor would necessarily say, no, this is not going to work out. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure, because you can put it in the chat if that didn't. Rabbi Reingold maybe could follow up.
Yeah, I would add, most times before they're actually engaged, a lot of the conversation is in the soul searching level of am I ready for this relationship, etc. Of that being said, I found that if you're dealing with older singles, or sometimes younger singles as well, there's people which are firmly ensconced in the world of singlehood. Either because that's the years have put them in that, or they tend to be very independent, etc. And the idea of learning how to mix with somebody and connect with them is something which, even though they're interested and committed to it, they're not so familiar with it on a real emotional, intimate level. Sometimes a couple like that, if they're not engaged, the process which will allow them to get to engagement is to start seeing themselves as a we, but even before they're engaged. Right now, they're two eyes, and the two eyes don't become one we. and the ability to move from being an I to being a we, which is what's holding them back from the engagement. In that situation, I've actually had a conversation with a couple like that more than once. They're not engaged yet, but they want to just talk it through what marriage is like, what it's going to be, sort of probing it together as a unit, allows them to see themselves as a unit. That it actually helps them get over that hump and get engaged. So it's something which potentially is relevant, but in more specific type of scenarios, as opposed to broad-based usage. That would be my answer.
Thank you. I think it's a great point. Much appreciated. Do any of the panelists see any questions? People have the opportunity to send questions to any of the panelists. So does anybody else see a question that people would like addressed? Okay. All right. Well, I think that speaks to the fact that the panelists really were very comprehensive, and I think any other questions would probably be of a personal nature, and people, whether you see members of this panel, I think that you could reach out to if you had more personal questions that you'd like to follow up on. And in a general sense, I really do think that the panelists did an amazing job, and I want to thank each of you for really giving us a great overview of some of what goes into the premarital process in general and the types of counseling that might be beneficial to get couples on the best possible start to their marriage. So very much appreciated. I want to appreciate everybody who came today. Thanks to Rabbi Reingold and Penny, this was recorded, and therefore we will be able to also share it with people that couldn't fit into this time slot. And I will be sending out emails with links for that. So you can let anybody know who missed it, that it was recorded and will be shared, God willing. I want to also mention that next Sunday, we will have another program, another free Zoom program that is being co-sponsored with Young Israel, Shomrei Emunah. And this program will be on a very different topic on early memory loss and diagnosis and options for what to do in that situation. And flyers have been circulated, and I will continue to send emails about that. And there's a wonderful group of panelists that have been assembled to take on that subject. So again, thank you. And lastly, I would like to just say that because we really are interested in shedding light, increasing awareness, bringing topics of interest to the community that again fit under this very broad title of healthy communities, please send us any topics of interest or panelists that you would be interested in hearing from on these topics. And we would love to collaborate with anybody here in bringing that program to life. We really look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible. Thank you again. Thank you again to our panelists for your time today. So appreciated. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and stay tuned for the recording. Be well, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you all for coming.